Okay, so today we're going to be painting two paintings kind of at the same time. You'll be working on one and then you'll move down to the other. We'll be letting that one dry while we're putting down some of the layers on this one. And then once we finish the ones here, this one should be about dry or good and dry to be able to continue on it. So you'll be getting the practice of doing, as you can see, a sunset, like an ocean view sunset, as well as a mountain view, kind of more of like woodland area. Okay, so the supplies that you're going to need are going to be a piece of 9x12 watercolor paper. You're going to need a variety of brushes, mainly a flat brush and a round, kind of a round brush about that size. So this is a size 6, okay? And then you may end up needing some of these skinnier, the liner brushes. So for some of the details for when we do the grass and the vegetation in the front, okay? So, but if you don't have any of these smaller ones, this round one can work. In fact, I've used the round one, this size round, for doing these on here, but it takes a little bit of practice to be able to know how much pressure to put down on your brush for that. So that's why these smaller brushes can come in handy. Okay, and then you'll also need your paints. So a palette of watercolors. You'll need a water tub that is for your cleaning your brush, and one for just pure clean water. Okay? And then the other thing we'll need is paper towels and masking tape. You also need a pencil and possibly an eraser. Okay? The first thing that we're going to do is going to be taping your paper down. So get your masking tape and your paper handy. You'll also want it to be onto a surface that you're taping it onto that it's going to stay on, preferably. Get it nice and straight. So a technique you can use, especially if you know that your masking tape is super sticky, if you pull it out, measure it about as far as that you're going to need, and then apply the tape actually to your clothing in order to get some of that stickiness off. It'll get some of the fibers from your clothes onto it, but that will keep it from tearing your paper at the end. Okay, so then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to measure it. So first, get just hovering over it, not putting the tape down on the paper. You're going to hover over to get approximately the length that you're first going to need, and then tear it off. Then hold your tape and trying to make sure that this is straight as possible. And you also want to make sure to try to keep your the spacing as far as how much tape is covering your paper from here to here. Try to keep that consistent all the way around so that you have a nice white border that is, for the most part, the same all around, okay? So we'll go through and do that. You want to make sure that you seal it down well, because this is going to prevent the paint from seeping underneath. So as I mentioned in class, the purpose of taping this down like this is because it keeps your paper from buckling as you're painting, so that once we start doing our sunsets and the water and our mountains and everything, it's not going to be buckling and then making water run all over into other areas of your painting. So, and then it also creates that nice crisp white border. So I'm going to, in order to divide these two paintings like I've done in the example, I'm also putting a piece across the middle. So just kind of estimate where the middle is. Measure out the size, the length of the piece that you're going to need. And then put it down and seal it down. If you happen to get any extra hairs or fibers that kind of stick out over, you might kind of try to pull those off, because you don't want that to be a part of your painting. Okay, so you should have all 4 sides taped, as well as one across the middle like this. Okay, so we're done with the masking tape. You can put that aside. Next, you'll need your pencil. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to do a very basic drawing of what we have here. Okay, so the main thing for this top painting for the sunset ocean is going to be getting your horizon line on there, and then maybe getting a little bit of an idea of the shoreline here. I actually did not do that for this one, but if you feel like you need it, even if it's just like a couple lines to show that when you are doing your ocean part, the blue, that you'll know where to stop, you can do that. Okay, so first let's get this one. So this is it's about right in the middle actually. And I did that so that I could equally show you the sunset sky, or excuse me, the sky with the sunset, and then also how to do the water, and also have a little bit of the beach on there as well. So find yourself the middle, and then get yourself a horizon line drawn on there. If you want to use a ruler, you can. You also could even use tape if you really wanted to. If you wanted to get the masking tape and put across here, that might not be a bad idea. I'll show you that. Because what it's going to do is it's going to prevent your paints from going down lower than what you want them to be. So if we put it like right here. Okay, so that will now divide the sky from the ocean, and we'll end up doing the sky first anyway. And then once this is dry, then we will remove this, and then you could put another piece on top of that so that then your ocean doesn't get into your sky. And then you can just use the straight edge of the tape to create, or to use as a guideline instead of using a pencil. But again, if you don't want to use too much tape, you don't have to do that. Okay. Okay, so then the next thing is, like I said, kind of the shape of this ocean. So I'm just going to kind of create the idea of it. Like I said, I'm not going to put in a lot of detail, but remember, you want to do this very, very lightly, okay? Because you don't want to see your pencil lines underneath your painting. So you want it to end up being a nice, lightly drawn on line. Otherwise, that is the only thing that I feel like I really need to. I mean, if you feel like you need to do your sun, you can. Just make sure that you're keeping the proportions correct. So your sun is not going to be giant. It's not going to be taking up the majority of the space of your sky. If you have it so that it's going down, lower below the horizon line where the sun is setting, then you only see part of it. So it ends up being kind of like a half circle shape. So something kind of like that. Okay. But again, don't do it too dark. Like I've drawn mine a little darker so you can see it, but I'm actually going to pull some of that off because it's kind of too dark. Because as you can see, the sun is going to be, there's going to be a series of yellows, and the sun itself is lighter than the sky around it and the shine that's coming out. So you don't want to be able to see pencil line. So I'm just going to kind of leave mine about like that. I'm actually going to go ahead and erase that line there. Just kind of giving yourself an idea of where it's going to be at, because all that can be kind of moved around a little bit as necessary. Okay, so there is the top one. That is all that we need for as far as the top painting goes, okay? Because we've now divided our sky to the ocean and to the sand, like the beach area that's right here, okay? So now let's move down to the second painting. So for this one, same thing, we need to find our horizon line first. So for this one, you'll notice that the halfway point is about right here. So I have drawn my horizon line a little bit above that. So if you find your halfway and come a little above it, about right here, okay? And this line doesn't have to be super straight necessarily. I mean, you need to have a good idea of it, but as you can see that a lot of it is covered up by trees, and the mountains are sitting on it, but otherwise you're not really seeing a defined horizon line like you do in the top one. So the idea is that you're just giving yourself, somewhere to start for getting your mountains and everything on there. And then that will be the next step, is let's get our background drawn in. So you can choose to do as many mountains as you want. It does not have to be as many. The idea with this is that we're using atmospheric perspective, right? So the mountains in the front are going to be the darkest, and then as they're getting further away, they should be getting lighter, okay? And then you also will be overlapping them, creating the layering. So I like to typically start with my ones that are in the front because it kind of gives me a good foundation as far as where I want my mountains to be. And you do want to give it some variety as well as far as the different types. And I'm kind of just letting my pencil kind of, dance around. You're creating mountains. These are mountains that you would find probably in maybe like Colorado, like the Rocky Mountains, or maybe the Smoky Mountains in Tennessee, if you've ever been there. But otherwise, they don't have to be real perfect. If you're not happy with something that happens whenever you're kind of letting your pencil dance, then just kind of come through and fix that. Not liking the look of that one. But again, you're drawing these very lightly, so you don't want your pencil lines to show afterwards. Okay, and I think I'll put one more right here. And so these would be off in the distance. Okay. So then once you get that, the next thing, significant thing that we need to line out is going to be our river or stream, however you want to look at that. So this is linear perspective, using the techniques of linear perspective. So on the horizon line, this is where your vanishing point is, right? And then as it's coming towards you, your stream should be getting wider, okay? But you want it to be a gradual, progressive thing of whether it's getting wider as it's coming towards you, and then so you should be getting skinnier and skinnier and skinnier and skinnier until the point of where it kind of disappears whenever it gets to that horizon line, okay? So I'm going to choose mine just kind of, and it makes sense that it's between these two mountains that I drew here, like these two, because it's kind of going around over to there, because that's probably typically where a river is going to be, between the valleys, between two mountains. So kind of want to just do a nice S-curve type line. And then, as I said, as it's coming towards you, it should be getting wider and wider. Okay, so and then it goes to a point of where two lines come together at the horizon line. Okay, so otherwise that is going to be all that you need to set up as far as your drawing your sketch goes, because when we come back to do these trees and the grass and all that, that is stuff that you will just be able to do as you're going along. You don't need to sketch those out. Okay, so we got our sketches on there. Now the next step is going to be getting our paint ready. Okay, so I'm going to start with, because I'm doing this background up here, I'll go ahead and start with this big one. I may end up changing to a smaller one, but we'll see. Okay, so pull over water. So pull over just some clean water into your palette, and then we want this to be, you could make your sky any color you wanted to. Just be careful if you end up adding blue, because you probably don't, because you have all the blue down here. So that's why I only use like kind of the pinks and oranges and yellows in the sun, or in the sunset. But if you do happen to add blue to your sky, be careful when you get close to yellow, because that will make green, right? And you don't typically want green in your sky. So I'm going to stick with the reds and the yellows, and then when those combine, they end up kind of creating that orangish color. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and activate, put some paint onto my red and my yellow. Okay, so go ahead and activate those. Now the first color I'm going to use is going to end up being the yellow, because I want it to be able to go ahead and get on there so that I can go to the next step. So I'm going to pull some of the yellow over into, now yellow is not quite as pigmented at the very beginning. It's going to be a lot lighter. So be sure to get over quite a bit of it. Okay, you can always test your colors by kind of touching it to your paper towel. And you can see, is that light enough for you or dark enough for you? And if it is, then you're good to go. But if it's not dark enough for you, then keep adding a little bit more. A little tiny bit more. Okay, so now what the first step we're going to do is we want to create, again, just for reference, we're going to do this bottom right here, okay, first. So we'll go ahead and bring that brush over using the flat wash. I'm going to go around my sun, and then I'm going to continue bringing that over. And now that I'm seeing it on the paper, it's still quite a little bit, well, it'll be a good base coat. We'll start with that as far as the lightness goes. So again, remember, you don't necessarily, depends on how big your brush is, you don't want to have too much water on the paper. You want to have kind of just enough. So we're staying away from our sun at the moment, because we'll come back later and fill it in a little bit. But for the moment, we want to keep it, kind of leave it alone. Just go around it. Okay? And then from there, I'm going to wash my brush. And then I'm going to come over here and pull some of this red into a different well. Now the red, you'll notice it's going to be a lot stronger, so you might need to add a little bit more water. Touch it to your paper towel, see if that's good. You don't want this to be pure red in your sky, because typically the sky is not red. It's going to be kind of more of those pinkish tones. And then I'm going to bring that up here and now, don't go down into your yellow until you have all the red on there that you want, because once you go down into the yellow, it's going to end up mixing with turning orange, and then if you bring that back into it, unless you want that. You might want that since this is a sunset, so I'm not going to be too upset if that happens, because I do want some of the oranges to come up into there. But just keep that in mind for any other colors or sunsets you're doing, to be sure to be careful with that. In fact, I'm actually going to grab a little bit of the yellow and pull into there now. So just be careful, because you're contaminating your yellow now with the red if you go into the well like I just did there. I'm okay. I'm kind of pulling it away from that yellow so that I kind of can create my own orange over here. So you could do something like that too if you wanted to. Okay, so kind of the idea, and you can pull a little bit of that red and orangish color down into your yellow, because typically the sky is not actually layered perfectly, you know. It's typically going to be moved, you know, a little bit of the colors here and there. If you're finding that you're getting those real choppy marks, you can always turn your brush to the side and use it like this, and it will kind of help break up that space a little bit, kind of make it look more like clouds. And then you can also pull all the paint off by dabbing on your paper towel and go over there and keep doing this, and see how I'm pulling color off. So I'm creating those lighter spaces, kind of almost like reflections from the sun and the clouds. You don't want to do too much, just a little bit. Kind of don't do it all patterned. You want it to be kind of more, a little bit more variety to it. Okay. Now we are going to come back and add another layer to this, so don't spend too much time doing that, because we will end up covering some of that back up. But it kind of gives you a little bit of a groundwork for kind of the idea of what's happening in this one. Okay. Okay, so go ahead and wash your brush out after that. Be sure and touch your paper towel, get off that excess water. So we're going to let that dry, and then we're going to move down to the mountain scene now. So I'm going to switch brushes, because this brush is too large for the tiny bit of sky, because we want to always start in the background, right? So there's too much, or it's too big for the amount of sky I've got there. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to switch over to my round brush, because I can get into smaller areas with this and be a little bit more specific about where I'm putting it. And that's always a good idea when you're doing smaller spaces. So I'm going to bring over some paint into, well, first let's put a little bit of the blue so it can be activating, a little bit of water into our blue. The only thing with this brush, it takes a little bit more to get more paint over here. Okay, and then from there we'll pull over a little bit of blue. And just like with the red, it's a little bit more pigmented than the yellow was. So, and you also don't want your sky to be like pure blue, because most of the time the sky is not that. So again, test it on your paper towel. I'm going to add a little bit more water, because it's a little bit, I think I got a little too much there. It's a little better. I think that'll probably end up being okay. Okay, so you want to go ahead and start getting it laid down. Now, if you want to end up making it look like clouds here, so what I've done here with this is the technique you guys learned using a paper towel to pull off the cloud, pull off the color to create the idea of clouds. So you want to have a substantial amount of on there, but you got to work fast so that it doesn't dry before you get to the point of being able to pull off the clouds. You could also, if you didn't want to have to worry about that, you could also leave the white of the paper in certain areas by kind of letting your paintbrush kind of dance around, kind of like this. If you kind of just did a little bit kind of here and there, you can use the white of the paper to make it look like clouds and be much more expressive with it. I'm going to go ahead and just fill mine in so that you guys can see how I do with the paper towel. But if you feel inclined to try it out with the other, you can. Remember, this is just practice, so. Okay, so just make sure, kind of go back over and see if you've still got some areas that are drying up real quickly. And don't be afraid to go onto the tape there, because that's what it's there for. And if you get a little on your mountains, it's not the end of the world. As you can see, I've done that. We can go back and pull it off. I'll show you how to pull that off. Okay, so then clean your brush. Now you'll want to get your paper towel. So kind of wad it up. Make sure it's nice and kind of a different type of, you know, not all bunched in together. Have some different variety with it. Okay, and then you kind of just go through. You might need to find a new spot once you have soaked up enough and it doesn't feel like it's pulling off much color. Okay. If yours has dried too much, something else you can do, like mine over here kind of has dried a little bit too much. So I got some water on my brush, but I'm touching it to my paper towel to get off the excess, because there's a lot on there, right? But then if I come back in and I can kind of go there and pull some of that color off in those areas that, like, I can see where my paper towel is at, but it's not quite as bright as over here. So kind of working in these little small circular motions, and then don't do it too much though. You don't want your you don't want it to look too forced, and you don't want to make your paper start piling up. So just a little bit, just to kind of pull off, because I'm seeing a little bit of color on my paper towel here. So I'm pulling off more than probably what I think I am, but it kind of will just help create that. And it ends up making these clouds kind of look like they're further in the distance anyway, which makes sense because all these are further in the distance, right? Where these are a little bit up close. Okay, so add just a tiny bit more over here for blue though, to balance out, because it's got quite blue. I don't want it to look too unbalanced. Okay, so something kind of like that. Just the idea is, if you just be careful working back into it, because it can make it mushroom out if it's already too dry. Okay, so I will be good with that. Okay, so now we're going to feel up here and see if this is dry enough. If it's still cold to the touch, then it is not dry. Mine is in certain areas. I'm going to use a blow dryer on it just for a second. Okay, that's better. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the flat brush, or if you want to stick, if you like this one more, you can. Actually, yeah, no, I may stick with it, because I kind of, to get these little smaller looking clouds, the little striations kind of, I was using the round brush. So I will go ahead and keep this one. So I've got all the water off my paper towel, so I'm going to go ahead and get that, or paintbrush, excuse me, dab a little bit on there. And then the next thing that we want to do is we're going to get more of the yellow. So let's make this a little bit more vibrant. And then as you can see, I've also brought it into the red a little bit, and it kind of created those extra orange colors. Kind of almost looks like highlights, like the sun reflecting off of it. So I'm adding a little bit more of my yellow into this mixture I had already mixed here, or had here, because I want it to be a little bit more bright. There we go, that looks better. So you can see the difference between those. Okay, so then otherwise, then I'm going to go through and kind of go around that. But again, I'm just going to kind of be very expressive here with your paintbrush. Just kind of let it dance around. Don't be real tight with it. Just let that arm loosen up. Add a little bit more. You don't want it to look like you painted a circle around the sun, right? So be sure you smooth that out before it dries. And then you're going to come through. And again, you're not covering every inch of it. You want to leave some areas kind of poking through, because it's going to make it look like, again, reflection from the sun, or maybe some clouds that are just a little bit lighter. And same thing, once you kind of go up here into the red area to create that kind of orange, kind of keep in mind where you had already pulled off that color earlier, if you did that, and kind of maybe staying away from that, and that'll give you some good contrast and kind of make it look like the clouds. You don't want to do too much of this though, because then it'll look too choppy. You want it to look, or too forced. So you want it to still kind of look like the idea of it. I'm going to pull a little bit more yellow, because I'm still not quite achieving the purity I was wanting. There we go. So you kind of can just play with this. Again, this is just practice. Okay. Just play with where you're happy with your colors. It does not have to look just like mine. A little bit of, there we go, a little bit more. You can pull a little bit of this red in there, just to kind of give a little bit more substance to the top up there. So kind of it looks like there's some areas that are just a little bit darker than the yellow. Not too much on my brush. If you do that and you don't touch it to your paper towel before, just be careful, because you can put way too much on there and you don't want to, especially with this technique we're doing right now. Okay, so just kind of letting that dance around. Okay, I think I'm happy with that. I'm going to wash my brush. Now, we had kind of created that a little bit. You want your sun to be kind of at this stage typically when it's going down. It's typically more of like a kind of that orangey yellow color. So we've already had that little bit here. I'm going to pull over a little bit more yellow into my side over here. Kind of pull it away from your orange or yellow. Here, there we go. And then what I'm going to do is, a little bit of this red, because we won't be using red for anything else. Pure red anyway. And bring some of that over in. Let's see, test that. There we go. That's pretty good. So for this one, I ended up leaving my sun kind of more on the lighter yellow side, but it was also because I put it on there and then I tried to pull some off because I wanted it to be lighter. It got too bright for me. And then because this paper is, student grade, it started kind of pilling up. So I just said, I'm going to leave it and it'll just be a lighter color. So, okay, let's see. If you still have any kind of paint pooled up, be careful because it will, or wet right here, it will bleed into it. It won't be the end of the world if it does that because it's all kind of, a part of itself, but you might not want it to do it a lot. Okay, so kind of just be careful, get your shape real first. Now I do want this to be a little bit darker than that. So don't get too much on there because then it'll take forever to dry and it will not dry how you want it to. So you want it to be so that it's a thin enough layer that it can dry easily without creating any sort of, I think I got a little too much on there. So I'm going to pull some. I've got a clean brush and I've wiped off the excess water and I'm letting my paintbrush soak up the extra water that's on there. So there we go. That's better. Okay. So now we're going to let that dry. And then what we're going to do is we're going to come back and I'm going to do a little bit more because it's still not quite as, it doesn't make it look like the sun is, shooting out its rays. I mean, you don't want it to look like shooting out rays, but it's not radiating as much, but when the sun's going down like this, typically it does look a little bit more. So I'm going to add one more coat of yellow there, a little bit more, to kind of help push that a little bit further. Okay, so now we're going to come back down here